Muay Thai and kickboxing should be extremely big in the West. But why aren't they? On paper, Muay Thai and kickboxing should be pretty big here in the West. When your casual friend watches UFC, they oftentimes just want to see the striking and knockouts and the stand-up in general and dread seeing fighters go to the ground. As Bob Arum beautifully puts it, MMA is just a bunch of
guys rolling around like homosexuals on the ground.
On the other side, when Dana was asked if he was going to add kickboxing to the list of things he promotes, he said, "Tell me the last time you saw a big kickboxing match that's pulled gates, the world cared. Never happened." Though in the graphic I found this quote from, it shows the gate and attendance numbers of one of the biggest UFC events, Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez, pulling in $17.7 million and 21,000 people, being dwarfed by the Japanese kickboxing event between Tenshin and Takaru, raking in $25 million and 60,000 people in attendance. And if it was really the popularity that is stopping Dana from promoting a sport, then why the hell does Power Slap exist? Power Slap is doing god-awful numbers now, even with Dana's aggressive promotion, and I don't think before Dana's acquisition, these slapping competitions were doing numbers, let alone the numbers kickboxing is doing now. Though I'm sure if a guy like Dana with insane promotional power actually wanted to promote kickboxing or Muay Thai, that would be wildly successful because again, that's really what the casual fans tune into. This is why typically in the West, the biggest stars are always strikers. Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya, Sean O'Malley, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and on the opposite end, guys like Bilal Muhammad or Colby Covington are not as appreciated and are labeled boring because of their wrestle-heavy style. So if most casual MMA fans, which is a huge population, just wants to see the striking part of the sport, then why isn't the sport that's literally all striking big in the West? There really isn't a single reason as to why kickboxing and Muay Thai isn't big in the West, but it really just boils down to Western sports culture, which makes it hard for these sports to thrive. Also, for those not in the know, kickboxing is just how it sounds, boxing with the ability to kick, while Muay Thai is the art of 8 limbs, meaning 2 punches, 2 kicks, but also 2 elbows and 2 knees. And another thing to note is that Muay Thai and kickboxing have broken out in some Western countries. Of course, I'm talking about the Netherlands with their Dutch style of kickboxing, and also France as well. But I would say a majority of Western countries aren't too interested in these forms of striking. So the first reason as to why kickboxing and Muay Thai isn't big in the West is because of how well established boxing and MMA is in the West. Boxing and now MMA in the form of the UFC is so culturally embedded in Western sports culture. Obviously, boxing goes back over 100 years now and has been one of the oldest well-established sports in the West. And because of their dominance in the Western combat sports market, it makes it hard for others to enter this market as well. I mean, do you guys remember how hard it was for the UFC to be established? Boxing promoters tried desperately to label mixed martial arts as something for skinheads, and again,
Guys rolling around like homosexuals on the ground.
It also didn't help that politicians were on boxing promoters' side, with former US Senator John McCain calling the sport, quote, human cockfighting, and because of this negative press, the sport was actually banned in New York in 1997 and wasn't legalized until 2016. And what's still really crazy to me is that big countries like France, who have housed some of the best MMA talent in the world, didn't legalize MMA until recently in 2020. It took the promotional genius of Dana White to turn the UFC from a freak show to, I would say, a pretty well-established sport that can compete with the West's traditional sports on most days, and to some, a little too well-established. So with boxing and MMA so well-established in the West and dominating in the combat sports field to the point where some people are calling monopoly, it practically leaves no room for kickboxing or Muay Thai. I also saw a comment on my community post about the topic, and it basically read that boxing and MMA satisfy everything for a combat sports fan. If you just want to see guys punching each other, boxing has you covered. And if you want more, MMA satisfies that itch with everything else. And though the UFC does encapsulate everything, kickboxing is essentially satisfied by a lot of specific matchups. If you just want to see high-level striking, you can tune into an Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira fight or a Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje fight. But even though these top dogs in combat sports dominate the Western market, I still do think that if a talented promoter like Dana White or somebody in the West was able to promote kickboxing and Muay Thai well, it would be wildly successful because, again, most casual fans still just want to see the striking. Now, moving on to a little more of a fucked up reason as to why kickboxing and Muay Thai isn't big in the West is because most of the best kickboxers and Muay Thai fighters simply have funny names to Westerners, and foreigners are often shunned in general despite how good they are. And this happens all the time in Western sports. Let me give you an example in basketball. In the NBA, Latvian star Kristaps Porzingis was booed by New York Knicks fans when he got drafted simply because no one in New York knew who he was.
What the fuck did they do? Who the fuck is this? Who the fuck is Tingus Pingus? I never heard of fucking Latvia. You drafted this fucking kid. You stupid motherfuckers, you.
And Latvia is already a Western country, so imagine some of the names coming out of these Asian countries. And also, fuck them fans in New York. Kristaps proved them wrong and balled out in New York as he was easily the best player on that team while he was on the Knicks. And this goes beyond sports. There's actually been several academic papers showing that a lot of times employers in the West are less likely to hire people with hard to pronounce names, and this is why people often westernize their names when they come here. So if we go back to the world of kickboxing and Muay Thai and we look at some of the biggest stars' first names, that's already pretty tough for Westerners. And then if we look at their last names, that's definitely not a good sell in the Western market. And a really cool thing to note about Thai fighters is that they will traditionally change their first name to a nickname that sometimes describes how they fight or just simply is something really cool. And then they'll change their last name to reference where they're fighting out of. So this is why Taiwan Chai's quote unquote last name is PK Sanchai Muay Thai Gym, meaning that he trains out of the gym Sanchai trains out of. You can read this one article, which goes in depth on how Thai fighters basically choose their names. I think it's really cool, and it's pretty straightforward once you try to sound it out. But if we're going to be honest, when a Westerner sees a long-ass name like that, it's definitely not going to sell. And another thing to note is that, yes, these are just nicknames. They don't actually change their legal name to this. On documents and stuff, they still fill it out with their legal birth name. But it's not like their birth name is any more easy to pronounce for Westerners. And yeah, it sucks to see that Western culture discredits talent simply because they have a funny name, but that's the reality of it, and honestly a big reason as to why stars in the East are not often big in the West. Another thing that's simply out of these guys' control is their size. Southeast and East Asian people are small, I should know. All of the biggest stars in Muay Thai and kickboxing come from this region, and they're just simply way smaller than the average Westerner. Usually, Western combat sports fans are drawn to the giants throwing it down. Historically, the biggest stars in boxing has always been from the heavyweight division, and that weight class has by far the most recognizable names in combat sports in the West. Now, I will say it has kind of changed in boxing and the UFC. I would say boxing's most publicized division right now is probably lightweight, and those guys are pretty small, and the UFC's most publicized division is also lightweight at 155, and those guys are pretty average sized. But historically, it's always been hard to get things going for the smaller guys. I mean, there was a time the 125-pound division in the UFC was going to be wiped from existence because the division didn't bring enough publicity. And or Dana White hates Mighty Mouse, but it's easy to see that the West wants things big. And finally, another good reason as to why kickboxing and Muay Thai isn't as big in the West as it is in other parts of the world is because of the immense respect these fighters have for each other and the lack of animosity. Kickboxers and especially Muay Thai fighters have immense respect for one another. Sure, Rodtang and Sanchai will start showboating, but I don't think any of those guys have actual beef with their opponent. There's an immense amount of respect between all fighters, which is great to see, but is a terrible sell if you're a promoter in the West. What really built boxing and the UFC in the West was shit talk and rivalries. In boxing, Muhammad Ali really elevated the sport to another level by being a huge trash talker. I mean, the guy was literally rhyming his trash talk. And obviously, Floyd would follow this level of spectacle at press conferences, routinely talking shit to his opponents. And I would assume everybody knows the story of Conor McGregor by now. With his quick wit, list of quotables, and his shit talk persona, Conor single-handedly elevated the UFC and its promotion with his larger-than-life personality. Shit talk, heated press conferences, animosity, and beefs are ultimately what sells in combat sports, especially in the West. I mean, look what's happening in the influencer boxing world. As big as some of the guys in kickboxing are, with their lack of shit talk or larger than life personalities, it's a hard sell for the West. But despite all those reasons, the constant violence and action in these fights is something the West would definitely enjoy. It just has to be marketed and promoted correctly. Obviously, Dana would be the best guy to do it, but he has some weirdly strong position on not inviting kickboxing under his promotion. But if one would somehow grow in the West and start competing there, I do think Dana would have to compete, and that would be amazing. But anyways, what do you guys think about the world of Muay Thai and kickboxing in the West? Will it ever grow to the point where it's as big as the UFC, or will it stay as something in the East? Again, thank you guys for watching. Peace.